Now, our next witness is Mr. Jenkins.
Mr. Jenkins it is, Lord, and he is physically present.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jenkins. Please sit down.
Thank you.
I should first apologise for us starting later than the time that you were given notice of. We sat a little longer in the morning than we'd anticipated, but I appreciate you'll have been here in full time for a 2 o'clock start. You're about to be asked questions, as you understand, by Mr. Connell, who's sitting opposite you. But first, I understand you're prepared to take the oath.
Yes.
Sitting where you are, could I ask you to raise your right hand and please repeat these words after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
That I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jenkins. Now, you're scheduled for the afternoon. I don't know precisely how long your evidence will take, but if you want to take a break at any stage, just give me an indication and we'll take a break. Could I encourage you to maybe speak a little louder than you would normally? I mean, you've got microphones and they're there to make you audible, but we've got quite a space to fill, and I have hearing aids. My hearing is not as it was. Now, Mr. Connell.
Thank you, my Lord. Good afternoon, Mr. Jenkins.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to start by asking you the same formal question I ask all of the witnesses, which is that you've produced a witness statement for the purposes of this hearing. Are you content to adopt that statement as part of your evidence?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Have you got access to it?
I do, of course, it here.
You've got it there in hard copy, and we'll bring it up if need be on the screen in front of you as well. If we do that, you'll find that there are electronic page numbers at the top that we might refer to.
Thank you.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit about your career in a moment. I notice from your witness statement that you're the Chief Executive Officer at the State Hospital Board at Carstairs, which sounds a fascinating job, but unfortunately we don't really have the time to discuss how fascinating that might be. But a very different role from the ones you've had previously, is that fair?
Yes, that's my current employment. I moved to the State Hospital at Carstairs in 2019.
Right, thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you about the 2 most recent employments that you held at NHS GGC, and just so we can get a picture of who you are and what you do or don't know. If we go back, first of all, to 2009, so between 2009 and 2015, you say you were the General Manager for Specialist Oncology Services based at the Beatson. Now, just in a couple of sentences, what does being the General Manager for Specialist Oncology Services mean, or did it mean at that time?
Thank you. So it meant that I was effectively in charge of the operational running of the Beatson West of Scotland Cancer Centre, and also the provision of specialist oncology cancer service provision out to boards across the west of Scotland, because it was a regional cancer centre for the west. Within that role also sat clinical haematology, including the bone marrow transplant unit, which is a subject of today.
Right, so that was all under your sort of general manager control, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Who was immediately above you in hierarchical terms?
So immediately above me was Jonathan Best, who would be the Director of Regional Services, which is the job that I then went on to apply for in 2014-15.
Right. So in your role in the Beatson, were you concerned only with bone marrow transplant or with other types of cancer treatment?
It was all cancer treatment. So the Beatson specialised in all specialist cancers, and it specialised obviously in the clinical trials aspect. It specialised in the chemotherapy services for patients. It was the West of Scotland radiotherapy provision unit. So treatments took place in the Beatson. We had inpatient beds which covered all ranges of cancers. And when it came to haematological malignancies, we had a ward which was B7 that specialised in blood cancers, and then ward B8 and B9 which specialised in bone marrow transplantation.
Now, you have to excuse our ignorance about these matters, but is there a dividing line somewhere between specialist cancers and non-specialist cancers? Specialist cancers
Sure.
you mentioned.
So for some very small tumour groups, as in there's not if you take breast cancer, for example, that's a population, it's a cancer that will affect a large amount of people in the population. So you would have local service provision, perhaps in Erin and Crosshouse and in different pockets of services across either Glasgow or the west of Scotland. When it came to very specialist cancers, which would be very small in number type, if I think perhaps of sarcoma, some of the rarer blood cancers, the treatment service would be consolidated in the Beatson where the specialist expertise was, rather than a larger tumour group where you had a more dispersed model where people would be treated more locally, rather than come to Glasgow for treatment in the Specialist Cancer Centre.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you about your next post as Director of Regional Services within the Acute Services Division. If we go to your witness statement, which I'll use as a kind of guide to help us go through the issues, if I may, we'll find at page 150, you were asked a number of questions about reporting structures, and you've clearly done your best to explain what you do and in some cases don't know, because of the issue that we get that everybody who's called director isn't a member of the board at the top level of GGC, just as might be elsewhere. I just note in passing on page 150 that you say you attended the strategic management team, SMT, and operational management team, which dealt with issues arising from the acute division. You go on to explain a little more about your role, I think, on page 155. So if we could just go there. I see under the heading Director of Regional Services. So this is, I think, between 2015 and 2019. Is that right?
Correct.
Rather than 14, as the question incorrectly states. Can you kind of sum up for us what the Director of Regional Services in the acute division does?
Yeah, so the Director of Regional Services, at the time, initially when I took the role up, had 3 portfolio areas. And these were services that were provided from Glasgow, either on a regional basis or on a national basis. So the collection of services that either boards contracted with Glasgow to provide, or that were agreed to be provided on a West of Scotland or national basis, were housed within the Regional Services Directorate. So those initial 3 services, clinical haematology and specialist oncology, was grouping 1. The next service, the Institute of Neurosciences, there are 4 neuroscience centres in Scotland. There are 5 cancer centres in Scotland. So those were managed on a regional basis, hence they sat within the regional portfolio. And similarly with renal medicine, plastic surgery and burns. At a slightly later date, the Glasgow Dental Hospital and School was also aligned to me. And then again, probably about 6 months into post, Forensic Mental Health Services, which is medium secure, low secure and community services for mentally disordered offenders, was then added into my portfolio. And perhaps hence the connection to the job that I do now, if that makes sense.
So the the name regional services is descriptive in a sense. It explains that the services that you're in charge of are ones that are provided not simply to the population of Glasgow, but to a wider population.
That's entirely correct. So I think I had 14 different hospitals across the west of Scotland where services were provided from. So quite often I would be in negotiation perhaps with Ayrshire Nairn, I would be in negotiation with Lanarkshire or Forth Valley in relation to services that we provided. We would provide, for example, consultant cancer doctors, consultant oncologists to those hospitals to meet their service need. And then as their service need changed, and similarly with the Glasgow service need, we would alter and tailor the provision of services as to how they were provided, where they were provided, and we would agree on combined governance and other processes associated with that. And that was the same across the other five, the whole 5 portfolio areas.
Yeah, the 5 portfolio areas, I think, that we see from what's on the screen and are narrated at the foot of page 155, and then you give a general description of what you did. Then you're asked on page 156, if we can just go there, who reported to you? And you say, well, the 5 general managers of the services that you've listed reported to you. And then, just so I'm understanding this correctly, you say that you were the direct managerial reporting line from the chief of medicine, chief nurse, chief allied health professional, head of finance, head of people and change. What are you trying to explain there? Are these who you report to?
No, these people reported to me in my director role.
Right.
So those individuals, the chief of medicine, the chief nurse, the chief AHP, the head of finance and the head of people and change were a directorate-wide function. So they covered the 5 directorate portfolio areas. The general managers covered directly their own directorate areas, if that helps.
Yeah. If you're drawing it, you would say they were on a sort of horizontal line and you were in a vertical box.
That the 5 pillars, the 5 vertical boxes were the specialties. Each had a general manager, and at the top was the director with those individuals around about working across the 5 portfolio areas.
And so they in effect might provide services to your directorate, in which case they'd report into you, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then if you go the other direction, who did you report to as Director of Regional Services?
Yep, as Director of Regional Services, I then reported to the Chief Operating Officer for the acute division.
And at the time you were there, who was that?
It was Grant Archibald and then Jonathan Best.
Jonathan Best being the previous holder of the post that you moved into.
Correct.
Now, I'm particularly interested, obviously, given the nature of the inquiry, in your connection to events at the new, let's call it the new hospital in Glasgow. And the first question you asked is the general one, well, what's your input into the design and specification of the hospital? And you asked that on page 156, and you say, well, I didn't have any at all until the BMT unit was due to come from the Beatson. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So, yeah, because you only became Director of Regional Services in 2015. You weren't involved in any way in the design of the hospital before then?
No, we had no services that were moving into the hospital at that point in time, because I say most of the services that we had were either in the retained estate. If I take the Southern General Campus, so for example, the Institute of Neurosciences was staying where it was. The Beatson was staying where it was. So there were no services from my area as general manager that were moving into the new Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
So your first involvement would be before you were Director of Regional Services, when you were in your previous post in 2013, is that right?
As general manager.
As General Manager at the Beatson.
Yes.
I may have simply misunderstood things. You mentioned among the services provided in the Beatson was the, if I remember correctly, was it hematological cancers in the Beatson Ward 7B.
That's
Did
correct.
I get that right?
That's correct.
Now, I think I've understood, and this is opportunity to correct me, that it was from a date earlier than 2013, the intention to move that service, not the BMT service, but that service to the new South Glasgow Hospital. Am I wrong about possibly sharing an area with renal services? Now, am I wrong about that?
So yes, but it
Sorry,
was
I am wrong.
It was hematology. There were two general hematology wards. One was at the Beatson, which was in Ward B7, and there was a general hematology ward in the Southern General. It was the ward that was in the Southern General that was moving into the new hospital. B7, which was the hematology ward at the Beatson, was not moving into the new hospital.
Right. I'm grateful for that. So just for my note, the service, how would you describe the Southern General Service that was moving into the new hospital?
So that was a general haematology service. It would have offered some chemotherapy treatment for leukemia and for blood cancers. That service was moving from the old medical block in the Southern General Hospital across into the fourth floor of the new Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. But I think that was only at 2013. It was following on from the change note that may come up later on.
Sorry, that
The
BMT
decision
service followed from the change note.
Yes.
Right.
So I may just follow this up. So far as the movement of the hemato-oncology ward at the Southern General to the new hospital, and such provisions as to be made for that and specifications for what they required and so on, were you involved in that process at all, or were you focusing on the Beatson?
It was part of that 2013 change process. So the two
I think I'm wanting to go back. Sorry to interrupt you. I think we may be getting slightly lost here. The planning of the move to the new hospital goes back before 2009, but a lot of the detailed planning took place in 2009, 2010. Now, at that point, we know from other evidence that there was to be a hemato-oncology ward in the new hospital. I think we were taking it from you that the occupants of that ward were, as it was then planned, before the BMT move was decided upon, as it was then planned, were coming from the Southern General.
Yes.
So the planning for that move would be part of the general planning for moving services into the new hospital, would it not?
Yes, that's correct, at an earlier stage.
At an earlier stage. And then the question I was asking you was, so far as we've had a lot about people specifying what they needed by way of environment, things called clinical output specifications, and so on. For that move from that ward of the Southern General into the new hospital, were you involved in that process, or were you dealing with the Beatson?
I was dealing with the Beatson,
but not with the Southern General.
The Southern General planning cycle, as you indicated, had taken place around 2008, 2009, which is essentially the services that were moving from the Southern into the new build on the Southern. And I believe haematology at the Southern was part of that. The general haematology ward at the Beatson, Ward B7, was not part of that. That was staying where it was at the Beatson.
With Mr. Connell's permission, can we look at Bundle 27, Volume 3, page 157. Now, this is a document headed Clinical Output Specification. Having regard to what you've said, Mr. Jenkins, there's no particular reason that you will have seen that before. What I'm seeking your help with, if you can provide it, is just quickly looking at that clinical output specification, whether that would be consistent with your understanding of the service provided at the Southern General, which we understand to have been moved into what became Ward 4C in the new hospital. I don't know if you want to take a moment or two and maybe to look at that page and maybe subsequent pages.
I was just checking, but I don't think this witness has been previously shown this.
No,
particular document.
May I see the next page as well, just in
yes,
case it gives me a
could
date and an
we-
author?
Could we sort of move to 159? And maybe on to 160. As I say,
Yes,
you may,
I would, this is the Southern General
yeah,
Service. It mentions the Beatson, but I think it's referencing the Beatson. This isn't the Beatson.
right.
It's the Southern General. I think the 14 beds were the Southern General,
Mhm.
which is a number that rings a bell. So that was part of the earlier process.
I'm grateful to you, and I apologise for interrupting, Mr. Conlon.
So that you had under your wing, if I can put it that way, at the Beatson, a non-BMT
Yes,
adult hemato-oncology ward,
yes,
which you described as B7,
yes.
which did not transfer either in 2009 as a plan or in 2013.
No, I believe it's still there today.
And what can I just ask this, so we've got this for completeness, what kind of things was the B7 ward doing in the Beatson? Just briefly.
B7 would have done, just very briefly reading that specification, very similar to the Southern General Haematology Ward. They would have delivered chemotherapy, they would have treated different types of blood cancers, and they would also have dealt with different blood diseases. So it would be the same type of service as the service that was in the Southern General. And that would have been born out of the days in the past when you had a North Glasgow service and a South Glasgow service, probably under an old structure.
Thank you. Now, I apologise for the fact that by the nature of the process, not all the questions I ask you will come in ideal chronological order. So please bear with me that you were asked basically what your involvement was in the design of the new hospital, and you said, well, I didn't have any involvement until the proposal came up, or the decision was made to move the BMT unit in, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Then we asked a question about commissioning, which of course takes you forward to 2015. And I just wanted to ask you about that. So if we go to page 157 of your witness statement, you're saying your only involvement in the issue of validation. And I think in fairness to you, at one point later, you say you're not an expert in the distinctions between commissioning and validation. Your only involvement in the issue of validation was prior to completion of the ward you were due to occupy. So that would be the completion of what was 4B for the BMT unit. And you visited the ward, and you say that you and the clinical team questioned the validation process for the hospital. Now, what were you doing there? Just tell us what you were asking about.
So in advance of the bone marrow transplant unit, B8 and B9, occupying the ward, we were invited over to see the ward and to meet with, I think it was Ian Powrie, who was leading up on the visits to the environment. I believe at that meeting myself and Parker, who was the lead haematologist.
Sorry, just make sure we get that name, if you may. Who was the lead haematologist?
Dr. Anne Parker.
Anne Parker,
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Myra Campbell, who was a clinical service manager for haematology, and I believe Laura Meehan, who was the lead nurse for haematology. We went over to the ward to see what the ward looked like, to understand the layout, to understand, for example, what items we would be transferring, how the ward worked, and generally to see the ward. We hadn't actually seen the completed ward, so that was at this point where we were across at the...
If you were asking questions, was it just Mr. Powrie you met, or was there anyone else? Who were you directing the questions to?
It was to Mr. Powrie. Mr. Powrie was definitely there, and we asked a number of questions when we were across at the Southern General, or at the New Queen Elizabeth, sorry, as I should call it. And the first, if you wish me to expand on that, the first point that was immediately obvious to us was the lack of pressure monitors.
All right. Now, this is why you later commented on the use of the word validation, I think.
Yes.
Because in the first answer at the top of the page, you say, well, you asked about validation, you were told it was being managed centrally, but you then explain in response to a follow-up question near at the bottom of the page, you were asked, well, why did you ask about validation? And you then explain it's due to the lack of pressure monitors. Just explain to us the point about pressure monitors, please.
So in the bone marrow transplant service at the Beats and West of Scotland Cancer Centre, if you walk into the ward, outside each room you will see a pressure monitor. It's essentially a digital dial that will tell you the air pressure, positive or negative, of the room that you're about to walk into. So visually, when you're on the ward, you can see if the pressure is within tolerances. Okay. When we walked into the fourth floor, Ward 4B, at the New Queen Elizabeth Hospital, those were not visible. We did not see pressure monitors. And therefore, that led to myself, and I think the team had a discussion to say there are no pressure monitors on these visible on the outside of each individual bedroom. How do we know that the pressure is correct and how the validation for the ward works?
So that's what you mean by validation, the checking that it meets what you require.
Yes.
We try not to speak over each other. Sorry. It will help for the transcript later. It's partly my fault. I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, that when you use validation in this context, what you mean is validating, i.e. checking that the pressures are within the tolerances that you're looking for.
That's correct.
Sorry, my lord, I'm not sure what
maybe just at risk of repetition, just teasing this out. We've learned in the inquiry that if one is constructing a ventilation system in a hospital, there is guidance available, and we may further discuss that. And in that guidance, certainly in its current form, there is a discussion of a need to commission a new ventilation system, which is, generally speaking, a function that the contractor or the subcontractor or his subcontractors carry out, and the validation of a ventilation system, which is something that the guidance indicates that the client health authority should do. Now, I appreciate that we have been introducing in the questions to you these words, commissioning and validation. When you were visiting, I take in about maybe June of 2015 or maybe May.
Probably just slightly, it would have been around 2015.
Was that notion of commissioning or validation in your mind, or was it not?
At the point of, and if I come to the term validation, I wasn't describing it in the way that you've mentioned about the formal commissioning of the building and the validation of the building. It was how we validated ourselves that the ward, in the absence of pressure monitors, was working on the air exchanges, was working on the specifications that we set out, and furthermore, how would we be alerted in the ward if we couldn't see a visual to tell us that the pressure was at a level that we wouldn't have expected?
Thank you. I think you already gave that answer to Mr. Connell, but I'm very grateful personally for having you having confirmed that, Mr. Connell.
We can understand entirely why, given what we've sometimes called the protective environment that's required in these situations, you are thinking, well, how do I know? Is this pressure gradient not what I'm looking for? Is there an alarm going off or whatever? Did you ask, or you or one of your colleagues ask, well, what do we do if there are no pressure monitors?
Yes.
And what was the answer?
That was the subject of that conversation. We were told that there was a central building management system that would alert us at the ward by phone call if there were any changes to the environment or to the pressure within the ward area itself. We questioned that, and I distinctly recall we questioned that, and we were informed that it was part of the central building management process, and that was the way that the new Queen Elizabeth Hospital was working. I also recall we remarked, because the Beatson wasn't that old, about how technology had obviously moved on since the time of building the Beatson, insofar as there was now a central system that would contact the ward in the event that there was a change to air pressures within the ward itself.
So the impression you gained was that the march of technology had meant that instead of having physical dial, if you like, in front of you, someone somewhere else got that information and conveyed it.
It was a central control system for the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital.
I see. Now,
can you recollect who gave you that information?
It was definitely Ian Powdery who was there on the day.
I'd now like to turn to some issues around the actual move. So if we could go to 158, please. Now, I'm not going to ask you, Mr. Jenkins, unless it crops up later, about why somebody decided it was a good idea for the Beatson BMT unit to move to the new hospital. We know there was discussion at committees and there was some toing and froing and a decision was made. So we could just leave that aside. So we have documentation about that, we have minutes and so on.
Okay.
In the main, after that, the only other document we have is something called a change order, because under the contract, a change order had to be given that the contract was already underway and something was changing. which was signed by Mr. Best. And perhaps we might just look briefly at that. I'm not going to pause too long on it because of a reason which will become obvious fairly quickly. Can we look at bundle 16 at page 1699, please? If you excuse this fact that this is probably a copy of a copy of a copy, you'll see that this is a particular procedure for the project. It's in a particular form, no doubt, for that reason. There are some details listed in the first narrative paragraph, form breakthrough of wheelchair bay and one or two other details. There's a business justification to move the national unrelated donor bone marrow transplant program. Is that was what was going?
Yes.
And regional related donor programs and potentially national sibling donor program, if agreed, from Beatson to a site with full ITU and HOU support 24/7 to meet accreditation and clinical standards for delivery of cyclotoxic chemotherapy. Is that a special requirement?
Cytotoxic chemotherapy, yes. So it's very potent. Cytotoxic again would mean that it's got a toxicity to the body. So it's specialist chemotherapy for acute leukemic patients.
That's dated the 9th of July 2013. Were you involved in the production of that document at all?
I believe I was the recipient of the document. I don't think I produced the document.
Thank you. Well, we may come back to it, so we can take that off the screen for the moment. Thank you.
Can I take the opportunity, Ms. Jenkins, just to explore with you what the purpose of that document is? Would I be right in thinking it is a request for the authorization to spend the £840,000 with Mr. Best directing this to somewhere else in the GGC hierarchy with the authority to give the approval?
That's exactly correct.
Right.
There are, in the bundle that I looked at, there are a number of documents that surround this. One, it gave a change control instruction to Brookfield through the project team. Two, through GGC itself, it acted as an alert to state that there was a change to the function of Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. This service was being added in. And thirdly, it then came to me as a document to show that this change was being progressed. So that would have been used in numerous different areas to initiate a change into the programme that wasn't expected.
And you were, and a copy or digital copy was being sent to you for your information. You weren't going to do anything in relation to that document, or were you?
Well, yes, that was really the first notice document around about what we had to move. So that was like a baseline document. And then from there, I had a discussion with Jonathan Best to say, can I run through the process for this because we are moving late? And also there was some terminology in it that I was aware we would have to explore and change further prior to us coming up with a plan about how you would move the bone marrow transplant unit across to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
Right. Mr. Conlon?
Can I just explore that last answer, that having seen the document, you were aware that something had to, let's call it developed, something is still to be developed. And what was that? What was it you were going to have to do?
So we would have to meet with the project team who were in charge of the building and the development of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. It obviously without stating the obvious, it's not as simple as here's 24 rooms for you just to move into. There was some really specific requirements of a bone marrow transplant service.
Okay, and we will come to that
Yep.
point shortly.
So we used that as to then say, okay, who do we now connect with through the project structure to enable us to take this forward in a planning cycle to reach a conclusion.
Right. So if you'd been a general ward with no special technical requirements, you might just have been able to say, well, instead of being in a ward in one place, we're going to be in a ward in another place, but you had particular issues.
Oh, yes, yes.
Can I ask you then, just before we leave the page, can we go back to 158 of the witness statement? Because this is a topic that has cropped up. You're asked, can you remember before that change order was done, whether any risk assessment or HAI scribes were carried out? And you say, I can't remember any of that being done. Now, are you familiar with what's the high scribe process?
Yes, yes, I am.
And what do you understand its function is?
So the HAI scribe process is where you would bring together the function of the environment, the types of patients in the environment, equipment in the environment. You would use it almost as a multi-source risk assessment with mitigations with various different professional groups, for example, infection control, estates and facilities, your own team, and various other members to use as a consolidation document to make sure that you were all working on the same risk assessment to bring risk down. It was a central document that we would use, a central process.
And for a move such as the one you were contemplating, where you had an existing unit that you were seeking to shift over into a new building which was partly constructed, how would you have understood high scribe to be deployed?
So the HAI scribe, once we had assessed and had a discussion with the project team about our very specific requirements and laid those out and assured ourselves that those requirements could be met in terms of then developing the ward environment, there would be an HAI scribe process which would contain all details of the service, the status, for example, of the ward environment, the types of patients that would be treated in there, and then how the mitigations would work around about the HAI scribe process from all of the teams involved.
I'm going to suggest to you two things that at least version that we have does, and we can put it up on the screen if you feel the need to look at the detail. But in a document which governs high scribe development stage 2, SHFN 30 part 2 of 2007, two of the questions that are asked are, first of all, does the design and layout of the healthcare facility inhibit the spread of infection? Just pausing on that one, would it have been important to your service to be able to answer that question clearly?
Yes.
So when you say you don't know whether high scribe was done or not, is that simply you can't remember, or?
At that point in time, I don't recall there being a pre-existing HAI scribe that had been done for the service.
Right. But on the basis of what I'll come back to the detail in a moment, but on the basis of what you told me a moment or two ago, you would have anticipated that process to have followed discussions with the project team where you sorted out what you wanted.
Correct.
Basically.
Correct.
Is that correct? Another of the questions in that section, if you just take it from me for the moment, of the same document, is the ventilation system designed fit for purpose given the potential for infection spread via ventilation system? would that also been an important question to be able to answer for your purpose?
Massively important, yes.
Massively.
Just really for the purpose of my notes, you're referring to SHFN 30 in the 2007 version.
Part 2.
You're referring to design stage 2, and you're referring to, is it question 3.51 and 3.52, or have I got the numbers wrong?
3.1 and 3.2 board. I simply didn't put it up on the screen for the witness.
But for my note, 3.1 and 3.2.
3.2. In that order are the ones that I have quoted to the
Thank
witness.
you.
Now, as your witness statement continues at this stage, you've touched on some of the reasons why people thought it was a good idea to move the service across, particularly the question of co-location with ITU and HDU. Doesn't matter, we know the decision was taken. But then you're asked on page 159 about your attendance and involvement in any design review meetings held to confirm with the user groups the requirements for the BMT units. Now, the way that question is written, it suggests you need to meet with the clinicians, but in fact, the questions go on to deal with meetings with the project team. And can I just ask you, before we turn to the detail of what you set out there, we know from your narrative that you tell us that there were a number of meetings and you tell us who was there and so on. We'll come to that. Did it ever occur to you that, given the massive importance of some of the issues you were discussing, the need to protect your vulnerable cohort, that there should be some kind of formal record, minutes, report, or something of these meetings?
Yes, it did, and I believe we received notes of the meetings that we attended. We did keep our own records of those meetings, but yes, that is an important factor.
But I don't think the inquiry has any of these records.
No, I maybe come on to that later on.
But
I'm sure you will cover that.
okay, well, I'll come back to that. Now, at the foot of page 159, you say the project team situated at Hillington either contacted us or we made contact with them, and it doesn't perhaps matter which was which. Then you go on to say, I think all or certainly the majority of meetings took place at the project offices in Hillington. Now, can I just pause for a moment there and say that clearly indicates there was more than one meeting?
Yes.
Can you remember how many there were?
There would certainly 5, 6, perhaps more than that. It wasn't a one-off meeting that we had. I would say around 5 or 6 meetings to define the specification and to look at plans and to continue to work with the project team on the needs of the BMT service.
And at these meetings, were the same participants present on each occasion, or did this vary?
The same participants were generally there at each meeting. I think in one of the meetings, Ian Powrie or someone from the estates and facility team was involved, but the core individuals from my side, myself, Myra Campbell and Parker, would meet with Heather Griffin, Mary Black, I think her name was, Fiona McCluskey, at the project offices in Hillington.
And just before we move from page 159, you say you were presented with large-scale drawings. What were these showing? Were these showing lots of detail, or were they just general outlines, or what were they?
So the drawings related to the layout of the ward and the Queen Elizabeth So they were not. I think at one point we got to what we called 1 in 50s, which were more detailed drawings where you could look at rooms and you could look at where things were. But the drawings that we looked at essentially showed the shape, if you like, of the Queen Elizabeth build. It showed where the location of Ward 4B was. It showed the through traffic routes, etc., of the ward, and those were the basis of when we started to talk about the type of service that would be moving in.
You gave us certain names that you recollect. Helen Griffin, Mary Black, you said, who may have been Mary McLeod?
Mary McLeod, sorry,
Yeah.
I think Mary Black, somebody else,
and
apologies.
Fiona McCluskey. On one occasion, you recollect, Ian Powery being at one of these. Was Alan Seaborn at any of these meetings?
No.
Do you remember anyone else who seemed apparently expert in mechanical engineering?
No, apart from Ian Powery,
Apart from Ian
he would
Powery.
be the only person. I think that location in Hillington is where all of the project team, including, I believe, Alan Seaborn, may have been based, but they were not in attendance with us in those meetings.
Right. I don't know, are you moving on from the theme of Hillington meetings, Mr. Connell, or are you still?
I'm going to pause for a little while on Hillington meetings, if I may, my Lord. Can we just?
Right. So you are moving on. What? Can I just float something with you, Mr. Jenkins, which is speculative on my part. If I understand your evidence so far, you would have seen as a purpose of your coming to these Hillington meetings as setting out what you are requiring from a service point of view in the new ward, which became Ward 4B. And you would be including in, as it were, your agenda, matters such as pressure monitoring, pressure differential.
Exactly that.
Air change rate.
Yes.
Filtration.
Yes.
Sealing of ceilings.
Yeah.
Now, as I say, this is speculation on my part. Is there a possibility that the people who you were meeting with had a different understanding of what the purpose of these meetings were? Might they have understood the purpose of the meeting to be concerned with layout, placing of beds, placing of soft furnishing? This is purely speculation on my part. Is there a possibility of perhaps you and your colleagues on one hand and the project team being somehow at cross purposes as to the precise purpose of the meeting?
I feel we explained what we had to explain because we were concerned about a full understanding of the environment that was needed for a BMT service. My feedback in the room and in discussion with Heather Griffin and others at the time was that wasn't an issue or wasn't a problem in relation to what they were there for. I feel that they had, because we were very late in the process, I feel that they had probably been working with so many different services at so many different types of specification that they were comfortable and were the team. Never at any point did they relate to us that we would need a separate conversation with somebody on mechanical engineering or a separate conversation elsewhere. We were talking way beyond things like curtains and beds and layouts and things like that. We were really specifying the uniqueness of a BMT service. And if I might, highlighting that when the BMT service moved from Glasgow Royal Infirmary into the Beatson, there were a number of problems at that point in time, and we were talking through what those issues had been at that point in time, hence our concern.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Crane.
No, I'm likely to stay on this point for a little while yet, Malone. If we go to page 160, this is first of all just to touch on the attendees. You say these meetings were attended by the whole team: clinical service manager Myra Campbell, lead consultant Anne Parker, lead nurse Laura Meehan. Now, Grant McQuaker, was he? Are you saying he was there, or he wasn't there, or he may have been there once?
So Grant and Anne were both haematology consultants. I think there was an occasion when Grant may have been there. But he, again, being a BMT doctor, I think he'd come along on one of the occasions to the meeting.
Yeah.
But the key individuals were Anne, Myra and Laura.
Thank you. And project team, you've given the same names you've just given us: Heather Griffin, Mary McLeod, possibly Fiona McCluskey. You thought there was the infection control nurse lead. Was anyone, as it were, chairing the meeting, running the meeting?
Heather was, yes.
Because the next sentence appears to indicate that they asked you what your requirements were. We were asked. Is that how you remember it?
Yes, yes.
Now, I'll maybe need to come back on one or two of these points, but just let's look at what you say in the next paragraph. You outlined that the specification of the Beatson wards, B8 and B9, were the specifications that were required. You were specific about the pentamidine room, air exchanges, positive and negative pressure monitoring, and the very strict criteria. We may come back to some of these required for patients undergoing this form of treatment. I think what his lordship was trying to sound out was whether, one party thinks you're going to talk about bed placements, and the other party thinks you're going to talk about air exchanges. But is your evidence that this was very clearly set out?
We very clearly set this out, yes.
Yeah. And you go on to say, as you said a moment or two ago, you discussed some problems that you'd hit when the BMT service initially transferred from GRI to the Beatson. There'd been a delay due to issues with the building. Then I just wanted to ask you about the next bit. We highlighted we did not believe there was a standard building note for a BMT service. Therefore, it was key importance that the information developed by the microbiologist was used as a baseline for the unit itself. Now, is that the specification of the Beatson?
Yes.
And in terms of air exchange rate, do you remember what that was?
The rate that I recall was 10 to 12 air exchanges per hour in the rooms.
And pressure gradient?
So you had some rooms were positive pressure, some rooms were negative pressure. For example, the pentamidine room, you needed the air sucked out, if that makes sense. In the treatment rooms, as you opened the door, you wanted the air in the room to push out. You didn't want it drawn air in from the corridor. So each room had a different function and would require a different positive or negative air pressure for the activity, the clinical activity that was occurring within the room.
And for a bone marrow transplant room, we understand the pentamidine room is a different issue. Can you remember what the pressure gradient was?
The pressure gradient, I think in terms of air exchange?
Yeah.
Is that what
Well, no,
you're
we've done air exchanges, but positive pressure, the difference in positive pressure between inside and outside.
I can't recall that off the top of my head, but we did go through all of these measurements.
And So you say, well, did you explain what you had at the Beatson? What specification you had?
Yes, we did.
Now, is that what you've just told us, or was there anything else? The specification that you explained to them that you had at the Beatson, were there any other features?
Of the Beatson or of the
Of the Beatson.
conversation? The core components that we explained about the Beatson was the pressured lobby area to enter the ward. It was the corridor area being...
That's what people sometimes perhaps loosely call an airlock
Yes,
system
an
to get
airlock.
in.
An
Yeah.
airlock, yes. So we explained through the layout of the Beatson. We explained the different functions of each room and what those rooms were used for. We explained this was different in terms of its specification to a neutropenic room, a hemato-oncology room. And the reason that we had said about we didn't think that there was a building note for this is that the Beatson was the only service in Scotland that provided the bone marrow transplantation service. And following on from the 2009 move, I believe it was, from Glasgow Royal to the Beatson, that there had been a number of late amendments to bring the Beatson up to the desired specification that it was working to.
It might be useful just to ask you to look at bundle 23, page 199. We just scroll down because the top of the page just gives you a short email. This is an email from John Hood to various people, transplant ventilation. And this has a list of things: sealed rooms, waterproof paint, fungicide in the plasterboard, positive pressure at least 5, but better 10, digital readout. Well, we've touched on that, particle counts and so on. We'll just go on to the next page. So is that the kind of thing you discussed, or did you not get into that kind of detail?
We did go into that level of detail on those points.
So just pausing there for a moment. I accept you've had a number of meetings. So am I right in assuming that this didn't all happen in one single meeting? Because you...
That's correct, yes, we had a number of meetings.
And why did you need a number of meetings?
Because we wanted to go back and have clarification that the spec was understood. We also had to provide more information that I believe we sent from the Beatson. We also had, let me just think back. Yeah, we wanted to assure ourselves that the spec was understood. And then, as I said to you, I think it went from the point that my lord had made, it went from looking at the wider topological diagrams to looking at more detailed in-room layouts. So it would have changed from that more complex outline at the start into the more, I think, as I say, they were called 1 to 50s, the ward layout and the service heads and different things that were coming in to the ward.
Now, you say, if we go back to page 160 of your witness statement, you say that you provided names for contact if anybody wanted to discuss the problems that you'd had before. But the point at the end of your paragraph was this was to ensure that all of the specifications for the Beatson were mirrored at the new unit. And then you say, we went on to discuss the ward layout and to sign some drawings and mark up our comments. First of all, what kind of drawings were you being asked to sign?
So these were the large A3, A2 drawings, where we would write our comments down the side in relation to the conversation that we had about the ward in relation to any changes. And then all of us in the meeting room signed our name at the bottom of those, on the same sheet on those actual drawings.
And can I just ask, because we don't have them, and for a reason
No.
you'll be telling us about later on, what kind of comments were you writing on?
So we would write any changes. We would write, for example, if I give you the pentamidine room again as an example, we would highlight that that area was used for pentamidine administration, that there was a specification in there that would be, for example, a negative air pressure. We would talk about any specifics in the ward layout of the functions of each of the rooms. And we would have been labelling them as such.
Did that include things like pressure gradients and air change rates?
It did, and if I might, the previous email that you just put up, would it be possible to?
Yeah,
Look at
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
again.
Can we go back to the last one? Yeah, and go
Yeah.
back onto the previous page.
Thank you. And just that this might be helpful or not helpful, it's that email from John Hood on the 23rd of June 2015. And you'll see my computer changed last Christmas and a decade of emails still reside. I've scanned the document, which includes the spec for the haematology BMT rooms in the top floor of the Beatson. Now, this was in June 2015 when Craig Williams was asking for the spec. And then he goes on to say, Ian had already asked me this question some time ago, which is Ian Powrie, and had pointed him in the direction of the Estates Department at GGC, which was Gartnavel General Hospital. So again, I just maybe reference the point that I feel from that, despite us not then being able to recall any of these after the move in June 2015, that the reassurance that we were getting that all of this would be taken into account was being taken forward through the project team.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question I think His Lordship probably asked you, but I'll just ask you at this point. You're laying all this out, you're saying we need this, we need that, we need the next thing. Is anyone saying, well, you can't have that,
No.
or that's not on, or don't
No.
be silly, or any other form of pushback?
The only point, and I can't recall when this came up, if we go back to the lobby rooms when you enter into a patient's bedroom. So in the Beatson, if you go to enter a patient's bedroom, you'll go into a hallway first, and then the door will shut behind you, you open the door and walk in. I can't remember at what point that was not going to be possible. And I've racked my brains trying to think about this, but I think that was the only compromise that we may have given. Without those earlier drawings, I cannot recall if we knew that at the time or if that was something that occurred later on. But that, I believe, was the only thing that we perhaps had a compromise about, but there was absolutely no feedback to say that anything that we were outlining was unachievable.
My fault for just losing attention for a moment. The one point that you compromised on was?
I believe it was the entrance room to the room, the hallway almost going into a patient's bedroom. In the Beatson, if you go to enter a patient's bedroom, you go into almost a box room first, and the door closes behind you. You open the door and go into the bedroom. So the corridor pressure doesn't go straight into the patient's room. In the Queen Elizabeth, because of the way the wards were laid out and the bedrooms were laid out, that wasn't possible. And I can't remember at what point we had a discussion about that. It must have been when we saw the drawings, but I can't remember now. Did we say, can that be amended? Or with the other mitigations in place, would that be a risk that could be tolerated?
I think the inquiry has been using the expression a positively pressured lobby
Yes.
to describe what I think you've just described to me.
Yes, a lobby room that you would want, a room before you go into a room,
Right,
if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Thank you.
Just to try and complete this story, if we go back to the witness statement, please, at 161. Yeah, you asked various things. We won't pause on all of them, but you say about 2/3 of the way down, we would have made the project team aware of the air sampling and testing procedures that we had in place at the Beatson and why these differed from what you would expect in the general hematology and hematology oncology ward. So is that you giving yet more information?
Yes, yes.
And then you're asked about ceiling tiles, and you say, I can't remember what ceiling tiles were discussed, but you do remember discussing the rooms requiring to be sealed rooms.
Yes, absolutely. They had to be sealed rooms.
And airlocks, is that the entrance airlocks into the ward generally?
Yes.
And that you also discussed the way the Beatson was laid out, but you don't remember discussing materials, as we see going on to 162. And you didn't have any particular concerns about layout because you were more concerned about having the synergy with the ITU and HDU.
So that was part of the core reason for moving, is that the high dependency unit at Gartnavel was no longer there, and therefore the ability for the BMT unit to remain there in the long term was not feasible. The unit would not have been accredited, it would not have passed accreditation because there was no level 2 or level 3 facility at the Gartnavel campus.
Just so we have that clear, level 2 facility?
So if you take high dependency unit and level 3 being critical care unit, it's the stepping up of intensity of care treatment to the patient.
Thank you. Now, you're asked on page 162, but halfway down, did anyone ever tell you you can't get 10 air changes? And you're shaking your head.
No.
The answer to that is no. Or then your witness statement, you were told this much later on, after the service had gone back to the Beatson post.
That's correct.
The initial move. And then you asked the question, well, were you discussing air change rates, pressure differentials and requirements for HEPA filtration set out for a neutropenic ward in SHTM 0301? And your answer to that is that's the very point we made. So is this returning to the same thing? You're trying to make the point that this is not a general hemato-oncology ward.
Absolutely. And if I go back to the 2013 document that was written by Jonathan Best, it does indicate on there, I'm sure, SHTM 0301, neutropenic ward. And so using that as my reference document, I was really keen to say that this is different to a hemato-oncology ward.
Could I maybe seek your help on a question of definition, really? As you say, if one goes to SHTM 0301, as it now is, or as it was in the 2009 draft, there are recommendations for air change rate, pressure differential, and filtration for what the table in the SHTM describes as a neutropenic ward. Now, I fully understand why the BMT unit, which you were concerned with transferring, would come within the definition of neutropenic. What I want to explore with you is whether what you describe as a general hematology or hematology oncology ward, such as the service that we've identified as being in the Southern General and then becoming 4C in the new hospital. Would you not describe that as a neutropenic ward as well?
I would describe the 4C service, the haematology service that was in the Southern General, and the service that was in B7 at the Beatson as the neutropenic.
You would describe
ward.
them as
Yes.
neutropenic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that maybe helpfully moves me past the next question, because you're asked something very similar in your witness statement. Because as we know, what happened was that whoever was going to be in 4B before was being moved, and we're told it was moved into 4C, but that wasn't, if you like, the cohort that were being moved, to use that phrase, were not your cohort. This was a cohort that was coming from the Southern General.
Yes.
Yeah, as we discussed earlier. Can we look at Bundle 52, Volume 4, Document 3? Miss it? No. You are on this list of attendees. This is July 2015, so we've moved on a bit. And I think you can take it that this is one of the products of the issues that then arose in 2015. I just wanted to ask you about it while you were here. Robert Calder had outlined the purpose of the meeting was to determine the current position rate of BMT units and the way forward, so they could get back as soon as possible. We should address what we saw, what we built, how we rectify, and what other areas might be affected. Conclusions: it was concluded the current ward is not suitable for BMT patients due to air pressure issues and high particle counts. Focus on rectification in the first instance. And then there are a series of action points. If we could just scroll down here, and we'll just carry on. Now, what I think we've then got is, as I understand it, an explanation from the contractors, or a partial explanation from the contractors as to what seems to have happened. And what that says is board's requirements. Requirements are set out in the following documents: clinical output specification for hemato-oncology. Now that's the original Southern General hemato-oncology specification that we talked about earlier. SHPN 054, SHTM 0301 ventilation. In summary, it says these documents set out the following design parameters: sealed room, HEPA filtration, single rooms to have positive pressure for the rest of the hospital, and an enhanced air change rate. Compensation event up 51. Now that's, it's not, didn't worry you too much. That's a process under the particular contract under which the contractor gets more money if something is changed. Instructed an additional number of rooms should be built to the same specification as those in the hemato-oncology ward. No detail within the change control form from the service to suggest these rooms should be anything other than more than HEPA filtered and built to the same standard. Now, I suppose that the question I need to ask you is, do you know what happened to your explanations to the project team of what you required? Because there's no thing said, number 4, material produced by Gary Jenkins and team from Beatson, or some other such description to cover the period that you set down over, you think possibly 5 meetings. There's no mention of that. Have you ever understood what happened to that material?
So, I asked for that material to be recalled, our planning material, all our notes, following the initial set of results that we get back. This was in June, obviously when the first sets had come back and they were not within the expected tolerance parameters at all. I believe I either contacted Heather Griffin or Fiona McCluskey, one of the project team, to ask could we recall all the drawings, all the notes, everything that we had submitted, everything that we had discussed, because I could not fathom at all how the specification that we outlined was giving us the results of the air samples that we were receiving. I then, as I've told you in my statement, was informed that the notes had been destroyed. I was told, I believe at the time, it was to do with storage and demolition of other buildings. So there was a whole bundle of paperwork associated with the project that had been destroyed. I then called Myra Campbell and again, I believe, Ann Parker to say we need to get all our notes from our notepads to assure ourselves here that we have actually specified the correct thing. Now, as I've indicated, obviously I left the organisation in 2019. Had I not, and I still had access to my account, I am pretty sure I would be able to produce email evidence of those conversations, of that follow-up, and of some of the communications that were going on around about that time.
Thank you. So you were bemused, that's my word, not yours.
Perplexed.
Perplexed, very well. As to how it happened that conversations which you tell us did not lead to any pushback, challenge, dispute, debate. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which you thought had been very clear as to what you needed, had somehow not gone anywhere.
They hadn't materialised into the outputs that we would have expected. But the first awareness of that was the air sampling results. That was the trigger to say something is not right in relation to the ward environment.
Thank you. Well, with the Lord's permission, I'll leave this document. So to come out of that, we'll go back into the witness statement. Could I need to move to one or two other topics if I can in the time we have with you, Mr. Jenkins? I think you explain in your witness statement, in particular 163 at the foot, that your first knowledge that there was any issue was when somebody said there were high air sampling results, and we know a number of issues were then identified that we probably don't need to go into it in any detail just at the moment. Can I ask you about a side issue, what's probably a side issue? Page 164 at the foot. In the way that happens in these type of exercises, we end up putting things that A is said to B. And Dr. Inkster says that she thought she was getting resistance from you when she was raising concerns about air sampling in June 2015. Now, you, I think, explain on 165 that, am I right in getting the picture that you were both coming at this from very different positions, and then until you understood each other's position, there was a bit of an issue?
Yeah, if I may first of all say I was astonished to see fierce resistance. I actually thought I had quite a good relationship with colleagues, but that, on reflection, I think that was the case. And I recall asking the question of how can we go from a building that's just opened with validated intelligence to having results that are so far out? And at that point, I'm talking to Teresa, that she would have signed off the validation and understood. And she's saying, I haven't signed any of this off. And I was saying, well, you're the infection control doctor. And I think Ian Powdery was in the meeting, and I'm saying, Ian, you told us what was the validation process. Has Dr. Peter seen this? And so I think we were all at very different places about what we all did or did not feel we knew or understood about each other's role on the day in that particular discussion. The other reason, if I might, in terms of the just around about the fierce resistance from me, I would simply highlight that probably within the space of 6 days, and from that meeting, which at the end I thanked the ICDs for their input, and that we would act absolutely on what they had informed us and on the outputs. We moved the patients back. I wasn't given any resistance around about the clinical need. What I was trying to understand was, how could we have gone from a state of a validated hospital that had just opened to having results coming back that were way in excess of what we would have expected to see? And I think Teresa Inkster was saying, well, she didn't have that answer that I expected from her. She was asking Ian Powdery, who validated the building. I'm saying, well, Ian, you told me the building was validated, and it turned out I think that was Craig Williams, who was the infection control doctor. And I think I would still have expected that the lead infection control doctor for the organisation would have communicated the results to the infection control doctors in the different parts of the hospital service. So it really was probably a sharp meeting of trying to find facts and establish how had we got to where we were after just having the patients in literally 2.5, 3 weeks.
So am I right in understanding, just correct me if I'm not getting this correct, that your point initially was, well, you've got this brand new, validated, checked, super duper building, and here we are getting way off the scale results. How does this happen? And then Teresa Inkster saying, well, I didn't tell you it was validated and checked, and it went from there.
That is exactly how it unfolded. And as I say, I think we were all at different places in each other's understanding. This, as you know, is the first that we came together in light of Myra Campbell alerting me to the results. I think it was the day before. But Myra Campbell had also alerted me to the fact, I go back to the fierce resistance, that she felt that Dr. Inkster was feeling particularly vulnerable, or that she wasn't being listened to. And I said, well, thanks for letting me know that in advance of getting into the meeting. And as I said, I made a note to actually express my gratitude and thanks to the infection control doctors at the end of it.
Thank you. If I can move on, if I could, I need to ask you about a number of documents, so I'll move reasonably quickly past a number of points. You made the point earlier that when this all cropped up, you went looking for your records and notes and the drawings that you'd signed.
Yeah.
And you deal with that, for the record, on page 167 on your witness statement. And you also explained to us that you'd met with your clinical service manager, that Myra Campbell.
Yes.
And to check that you'd done what you thought you'd done.
Absolutely.
Did she agree with you, or was there any dispute?
As did Dr. Parker. They had been the constant with me at the development stage of the BMT specification.
Yeah. And then you make the point at the foot of page 167, you believe you'd articulated the case for a BMT unit, specified the differences, given examples of issues, and been given assurances that this would all be implemented. I mean, is that did somebody actually do that? Give you an assurance that this would all be implemented in a new BMT unit?
If I perhaps just go back to the point I'd made earlier, without having any of that document or emails and anything that I can go back and check, if I specify, for example, we said you must check with Dr. Hood. Dr. Hood was the lead ICD, a microbiologist that was involved in the Beatson commissioning. And I go back to the email that Craig Williams had sent to John Hood, and then John Hood indicating Ian Powdy had been in touch some time ago about this. It was issues like that no one at all was coming back to say this was not achievable at all. And I felt and was pretty sure that everything that we put forward was achievable, within the building. I mean, the main issue is around about the air handling in the plant and the air exchanges. So we had to be really clear about the supply feeding the ward, that it had to be capable of the air exchanges. I think it was in the rate of 10 to 12. And so we were explicit about that up front, recognising that the building was being built as we were doing this particular exercise. And some of the other stuff, again, that was not as complex, but again, around about it needs to be sealed units. You need to have for example, you need to have maintenance hatches because you have to be able to go in and do different bits and pieces. They have to be sealed. And the testing, etc., that goes on. So I think we were very, very prescriptive about it. And as I say, I also, in other correspondence that I was reading associated some of these bundles, did know Anne Parker as well, had corroborated that. I think it was in an email correspondence on the 5th of July, I think it was.
The reason I'm asking you quite so many questions about this exchange is that I think it's fault maybe mine, and maybe there's something that I've missed or predates me, but this is the first time we've actually seen a description in any form of a detailed process of information giving for the BMT unit, which seems logical. But we hadn't actually seen it elsewhere. And I'm not sure we've seen it in writing anywhere. I mean, that's a question I probably need to ask you. There was a big fuss, to put it no higher, over the fact that the BMT unit was turning up and then thinking of leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll come to what happens after that in a moment. Is there a reason why we don't find anywhere in any of the exchanges a document from Gary Jenkins saying, look, Anne Parker and Myra Campbell and I went over there and we made absolutely plain in words of one syllable what we needed, and nobody said there was a problem?
Possibly if I had access to my old email system, I may be able to go in and find documents to that effect that would have been sent. There would be correspondence, I would believe, between myself and Myra Campbell. There would have been correspondence between the project team at Ellington and myself. It wasn't really the case that we would have sat and done everything in the room and then not had any conversation once we left. I also think there will be information contained within the regional services, either directorate management team minutes or the clinical governance minutes of this process. But again, as I've indicated, I left the organisation in 2019. And I don't have access to, obviously, the system that I use. If I did, I would happily take an action to go away and find whatever correspondence I had in relation to that.
If, well, let's leave the written record part for the moment. If we ask you this, you describe yourself as perplexed, but obviously there was quite a big issue here, which ultimately involved clinicians moving their patients out, just having moved them in, which I think many of the witnesses have said was almost unprecedented. Did you make your point about what you had spelled out to anyone else within the hierarchy of NHS GGC? Did you explain this to anyone?
Yes. I was quite clear. I obviously had to brief Jonathan Best. He was the next in line. And I believe that Grant Archibald was back at that point as well. He was the chief operating officer, and Jonathan had been in that role too, covering for Grant whilst he'd been off. I also attended a meeting, I recall it, with David Loudon and with Robert Calderwood. I briefed Dr. Armstrong, and I then produced just a very high-level briefing note. I was aware that Kevin Hill, who was the Women and Children's Service Director, also had services moving in. I spoke to my colleague Anne Harkness around about, had any of them seen validation data? Was this something that I had missed? Because I was really, really concerned that I had missed something and that we had inadvertently put individuals at a risk. So there was correspondence and communication from me, and there was certainly verbal correspondence. And as I say, there was a discussion. In fact, there was a meeting as well with Robert Calderwood, Craig Williams, and David Loudon that I attended in the Southern General Hospital directly after these events occurring.
Yeah. Okay. Well, can I try? I'm conscious of the time. Can I try and jump on a little bit? You've hit the problem, and there's some exchanges about air change rates and so on and so forth, and testing results. Let's leave that for the moment. A decision is then taken, as I understand it, to take the patients out of the new hospital and put them back in the Beatson. Is that right?
Correct.
And that's what you describe, I think, for speed on 168 of your witness statement. And you helpfully tell us when that decision was taken, because it was the same day that Her Majesty came to open the hospital. Irony of ironies, that the decision was taken to remove one lot of patients. So they're gone, they're back in the Beatson. And then there's a debate to be had about, well, what now? You've moved them back out, what should you do? And you were then involved in that process. So if we go to 172 of your witness statement, we're going to look at the document just in a moment, but you were asked to do an options appraisal. Is that right?
Yes, this is a bit later on. This is yeah. So there's a number of events before that, but yes, this then moves us on to a different part.
And you asked, well, who asked you to do it? And you thought it was either Jonathan Best or Jennifer Armstrong. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was the idea of doing this approach?
So the passage of time, there'd been, I think, I think this was 2017, roughly, this time period. So between 2015 to 2017, there was a failed attempt, if I call it that, to relocate BMT back to the Queen Elizabeth. This was on a specification that Dr. Williams worked on immediately after the service moved back out to the Beatson.
And who was doing this options appraisal in terms of the producer of the document? Was that just you?
This one here, rather than the event that I was mentioning.
Yeah, the options appraisal ultimately came up with the.
Oh, so this option appraisal in 2017.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Sorry, Mr. Jenkins, did you get the opportunity to finish what you were saying about the failed attempt?
No. Do you mind if I could?
Yeah, my fault.
It's fine. It feeds into why there was an option appraisal, I believe. I think it was 2 failed attempts to take BMT from the Beatson back to Queen Elizabeth. We initially, Craig Williams, the infection control doctor, along with various other colleagues in the States, and myself and the haematology team, essentially redefined what was needed, what had been asked for, and that ties into the earlier email you saw, I think, where he contacted John Hood. Around about October, there was a decision that the service would be transferring back, but for some reason, Dr. Williams transferred the service back to Dr. Inkster. And then essentially when Dr. Inkster looked at the work that had been done, she disagreed and felt that there was significantly more work that needed to be done. So the service didn't move back, first point. There was then, I believe, a second attempt to try and involve Health Facility Scotland and various other groups, various other agencies. I think we had a discussion around about, goodness me, is this ever going to be able to move back? Are we ever going to be able to get to the specification that we need? And if not, what are we going to do with the service? There's no intensive care unit. There's no high dependency unit. The longer the service stays in the Beatson, albeit we had strengthened the infrastructure, we had an on-site anaesthetist, we had developed a high acuity unit that covered the Beatson and haematology. Thinking, where would you go with this? What would you do with it? And I think it was from that discussion, it was either with Jonathan or with Jennifer, that we said we need to look, is there a different opportunity in the retained estate? That was the estate that was still left on the Queen Elizabeth site or at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, again, because those sites had intensive care facilities, high dependency, renal dialysis, the other infrastructure services that were needed to support a bone marrow transplant unit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I apologise for interrupting you earlier. Can I go back to the question I think I asked, which is when we come to the options appraisal that we're talking about now, which is mentioned on page 172 and which we'll put up on the screen shortly. Who prepared it? Was it just you?
No. The option appraisal was prepared we had a planning manager, Marjorie Johns, who was very experienced in developing option appraisal processes around about weightings and scoring and criteria. Marjorie led that process. Marjorie was very experienced, very competent. She had worked with NSS previously, and this was a process that she was most familiar with probably out of all of us. The option appraisal process is multi-source. It's not one person. You all agree on different benefits and weights and criteria. That is used to prepare the option appraisal, and then there's a scoring process that follows that. And that, if I recall, involved haematologists, infection control doctors, and some other clinicians around about the feasibility of different options around about the Glasgow and Clyde estate.
So this is not just Gary Jenkins' idea of what we should do next. Other people input into the process.
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. It's more of the consolidation of a multi-professional group's opinion that comes out of that. And it was to try and determine where there are options that were available to us. And I believe in the eventuality that we would never achieve an optimal environment for a bone marrow transplant service.
Yeah.
So
perhaps we could have a look at Bundle 27, Volume 7, page 158. Now, the way this document works, it actually starts with the end,
okay.
because that's the recommendation. And we'll see that through. And the recommendation, as I read it, is that the Acute Services Committee is asked to agree the temporary relocation of BMT services to 4B. So, first of all, back to 4B is the option. Secondly, temporary, correct? That was the recommendation of this process.
Yeah, I'm trying to think why we would have used the word temporary.
Well, I think we'll come to that in a moment if we can. And the next paragraph, this recommendation is made on the basis that service delivery considerations require prioritization over ICP teams' concerns on meeting national standards and HPS recommendations. We can look at the entire document, but in terms of summary, am I understanding rightly that what was happening here was that there was pressure to get you back in to co-locate with all the things that people wanted to co-locate with? And at least temporarily, the recommendation of this group was, well, that for the moment trumps concerns about the specification not being correct.
Yeah, I can clarify those 2 points. The first one, if you like, on temporary, or I can come back to that just as I read the next sentence. The challenge at this point, let's say, was to come up with options. The clinical haematologists who were providing the service, obviously, to the patients, were working in a really difficult pattern. They would have patients off-site. I think there was something like 48 patients had been transferred on and off-site in the period of a year. The difficulty in an option appraisal process is that the haematologists, this goes on to a paper that was later discussed for the Acute Services Committee, felt that they could live with the risk of a slightly lower spec unit in relation to, was it 6 air changes to 8 rather than 10 to 12, and that if those risks were known, but the overriding risk was the risk to the patient of being on a cold site, a non-acute site that has the HDU, ITU, renal facilities, etc. The haematologists were absolutely adamant by this point, because of their experience having been at the Beatson now, that's March 2017, for probably over a year and a half, that they really wanted to get into an area that meant that they could consolidate the work and reduce the clinical risk that they had, and develop the synergies with the other services in the way that they had anticipated. And the second point, if I may, just when I see agree the temporary relocation of BMT services to 4B, I think that correlates to the next sentence, which at the same time, BMT services should be considered as part of the acute services review of cancer services to deliver a long-term sustainable option that will meet both service and environmental considerations. If I might just explain that a tiny bit further, if that's helpful.
Well, tell you what we might do, Mr. Jenkins. Let's have a look at the document.
Sure, okay.
And then we can very happily ask you to elaborate. So the first page we're on here gives a list of key issues to be considered. We don't need to read them through. We can see these. Can we go on to the next page, please? Financial implications. Okay, that's a kind of standard thing that you find on policy papers of this kind. Move on to the next page, page 160. And this is where you start the narrative of what is summarized in the early page that we looked at earlier. So we see background, paragraph 2, unit had to return to the Beatson following the identification of air quality issues. Service began to make plans to move back. And then you reference input from HPS about the specification and the infection control team's view on specification. So this is your reference earlier to more than one attempt to sort this before you got to this point.
Yes.
So you then get to near the foot of that page. If we could just scroll it up a little, just so we can see the remainder of the page. The conclusion there is that while further improvements could be made due to limitations of current plant and lack of space to expand, the 4th floor Queen Elizabeth Hospital could not be configured to meet the full specification of requirements as detailed by HPS and infection control. So that's your conundrum.
Yes, sorry.
And there was a further feasibility study and so on mentioned. So we go on to the next page, which is 161, description of the current service and the numbers and so on and so forth. We didn't pause on that. At the foot of the page, option appraisal, 2 meetings in February 2017. One to look at options, the other one's criteria and weighting. Now, take it these were not 10-minute meetings, these were longish discussions. Am I right?
That's correct. Now, I'm pretty sure I wasn't at the meeting. It was a dedicated session. I think it was probably 2 afternoons.
Right.
It wasn't it wasn't an in and out and add your score. It was having been involved in these and then having had feedback from Marjorie. It's a full stakeholder team that are discussing the various factors that play into the option.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next page. Options considered, long list of 8. 4 were removed. 4 options remaining at the Beatson, returning to level 4, going onto the roof of the new maternity building, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital maternity building, or going to the Institute of Neurological Sciences neurology building. And then I think what we find in the next paragraph are summaries, as it were, of considerations against each of these options. 1, remaining at the Beatson requires significant changes to clinical support. Going back to level 4, you see here, unlikely to be a long-term option. So that's the summary conclusion, which we discussed briefly earlier. Would you agree? Quality of built environment is main issue. Maternity roof, technically feasible. We can forget options 4, 5, 7, and 8, and then the remaining one is neurology ground floor with external extension, difficult but feasible. And then we go on to, as it were, the mechanics of the process. I think the different criteria which were built into this options appraisal, benefits criteria and weighting. I don't think we need to read through all of these. So if we can just scroll on to the next page. And again, we can see there's a fairly extensive list of criteria being taken into account. Is that fair?
Yes.
So on to the next page again. That's your scoring matrix. So move on. And this is where your planner was helping you to work out how you balance the different issues. Is that right?
Yeah, the planner was leading on this, yes.
Yeah. So option scoring, each member of the scoring team, how many members do you know?
I've got a funny feeling there's 7 or 8, but again, it should be contained. There should be membership within this document.
Let's move on. 166.
There.
So here you have option 1, remain at the Beatson, and then there's a summary of what that showed, and you end up with what's described as a weighted score 448. Is that right?
Yes.
And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yes.
So service clinicians, infection control, and 2 others, IP and MM.
MM must be Melanie McColgan, who's the general manager of the Beatson, the specialist in oncology, clinical haematology. IP makes me think it will be Ian Powery.
Right. Then we go to option 2, which is the one that perhaps in some ways we're particularly interested in. Felt to deliver an improved patient journey with consolidation of services. However, let's go on to the next page. Option 2 did not score well against criteria to meet environmental standards, nor was it felt to be a sustainable option for the longer term. So, although we talked around the temporary point earlier, this process, good, bad, or indifferent, has clearly identified this not a long-term solution more than once. Is that right?
Yes, that point correlates into the opening summary as I read it back.
Yeah. And the weighted score for that is 600, and then we'll find that there are weighted scores for the others. If we just move on to 168, we'll find a score of 614 for the maternity building option. Institute of Neurological Sciences also 614. So onto the next page. risk assessment, and then clearly what's been done here is that each of the options have been risk assessed. Is that right?
Yes, that's a detail of the explanation, I think, around about the clinical risks, probably service risks and other risks as the document goes on.
Yeah. And the risks to be considered are listed at the top of page 169. So if we go on to the next page, if we go to the next one, because this is still looking at the Beatson, which we know wasn't the option ultimately selected. Can we go on to find, yeah, here we are. So here's option 2 being risk assessed. Facility in 4B does not meet the standards set out in SHTML 301 or HPS guidance. Main concern is of airborne infection. Now, if it was to be suggested there was no risk to operating the BMT unit in the new hospital at the levels that we've talked about, i.e. not achieving what you asked it to achieve, what would you say to that suggestion?
That there were
No risks.
That would be untrue, that there were no risks.
And there are mitigations which are mentioned. Antifungal prophylaxis is one of them. Although I think we know from other evidence that that's not always suitable for every patient or can produce side effects and so on.
That's correct, yeah.
So we just go on to 173. That's option 3 and 4, and 174. Sorry, I may have missed the start of that paragraph on 173. That's my fault. 173, please. Yeah, conclusion. Sorry, it slipped off the bottom of the page. 3 and 4 scored the highest, so that's your 614s. With regard to delivery of environmental standards, with other concerns given the close scoring, the group discussed option 2 as an interim solution for a time-limited period. Could not provide the required environmental standards, but only those services that have moved into purpose-built facilities are currently delivering this standard. That was something you checked out. The recommendation, you're basically asking the Acute Services Committee in this paper to consider option 2 as an interim solution. That's the way the paper ended up, as we found out at the start. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And then we go on to the next page just to see how it finishes. At the same time, this is your point about the acute services review. You ought to think about something wider to meet all the considerations, if that's possible.
Yes, I believe at that point, and I'm sure you might have come across this in other discussions, we had a discussion about what is the future of, well, Gartnavel, but also the Beatson West of Scotland Cancer Centre. And therefore, if you were doing a review of strategic cancer services and their placement, and you were potentially creating another environment, you would then think about taking BMT as a new build. The only way that you were going to get the panacea, the perfection, was to rebuild from the ground up. And I believe when I said the temporary, that is in the context of thinking about what a redevelopment of the cancer model, the cancer strategy for Glasgow was. I think that is what that context is that is cited in the paper.
And what you tell us in your witness statement, if we can just leave the paper for the moment and then go to 174 of your witness statement, was that Dr. Jennifer Armstrong wasn't happy with this paper that you'd produced and the conclusions in the way that they were expressed. Is that right?
I didn't think it was that version of the paper, but it was a very similar paper. I think in my bundle it was marked finance and performance, but it's essentially the same paper.
Yeah.
the paper that Dr. Armstrong and I were at odds, if you like, about was a paper I thought, or I believed it was for the Acute Services Committee, and the way I had wrote the recommendation on the paper highlighted that the consideration to move patients back to 4B, the recommendation to move patients back to 4B, essentially was taking a view that the haematologist's opinion of the clinical risk was a greater factor than the microbiologist's infection control team's view of the risk. What I was trying to say to Jennifer at the time was, I cannot get a consensus between the haematologist and the infection control doctor. Teresa and the infection control team, it had to be 100%, the environment had to be 100% perfect, and I can understand why. The haematologists were happy to live with the risk, but felt they were dealing with a higher level of risk because they were transporting ill patients by ambulance through the Clyde Tunnel into high dependency facilities at Queen Elizabeth. Once they were recovered, having to transfer them back to the Beatson, and there wasn't the backup support on site at the Beatson. So the haematologists, and I think it comes up earlier in that there was feedback from families and from others who were expressing that the service they wanted and were used to was becoming suboptimal because it was split. So what I was trying to say in the paper, and this is where Jennifer and I were having a disagreement, I couldn't write something that says there is a consensus here. There was not a consensus. And therefore, the only recommendation I could put was with the caveat that this is taking the haematological opinion over the infection control, the microbiology opinion, because there was no compromise between two that would have allowed you to get to a position where both parties were entirely happy. Again, if it's helpful, just to clarify what I'd meant about the disagreement with Dr. Armstrong, and there, if that's helpful, just for the record.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm conscious that time is running on, and I probably have put this point to you, but in your witness statement, you were basically asked, look, there's a whole series of documents in and around this topic to which you have put your name, running from 2015 to 2018 and so on. And the suggestion was made to you, in none of them do you say what you've said in your witness statement, which is that I and my team turned up and laid down very clearly what we required and got no pushback. And that seems perhaps to an outside viewer rather odd that, if the service was faced with a difficult problem, you weren't making the point that you and your team from the Beatson had done everything dot and comma that you thought you had to do.
I could, if it's helpful, perhaps write either subject access request or by some other way for my previous correspondence, if it could be reconstructed, and I would be happy to take time to go through any correspondence if I could bring paperwork or documentation to answer that point. If that would be useful, I would be happy to take that on.
Well, let me just put one thing to you, just as an example. If we look, please, at bundle 27, page 291. This should come up for us. Sorry, volume 3. 2291. Now, this is fairly early on when this problem is quite hot, if I could call it that. 6 July 2015, bottom of the page, you are writing to Grant Archibald, David Stewart, copy to Craig Williams. Please find attached briefing note with regard to discussion day and BMT issues. Preferred clinical view is to go back to the Beatson on Wednesday. I'll come in to discuss it. So this is fairly early, before the difficulties perhaps have been fully explored and all the different options have been gone through. And if we look at the briefing itself, which is in bundle 13 at page 840, there's a discussion about the Pented Medine room and some of the possible solutions, and there's a conclusion that you should go back to the Beatson. I suppose we just have to put this point to you, Mr. Jenkins, that you describe yourself as perplexed. Another way to put it might well have been aggrieved that you'd gone to all this trouble, you and your colleagues, to spell out a specification as you thought that was clear and detailed and reference to documents and other experience. And here you are reporting on what's happened, and you're not sort of saying, we laid this down in detail. And it might just appear a little odd. So I wonder if you could help us at all as to why not.
Sure. Do you know the date of that document? I may have put a date on it.
It's your email is the 6th of July 2015.
Okay, so that would have been the Monday. So on the 3rd of July, which was the Friday, I think we received the second set of results back. If you recall, I'm getting my dates right, the 30th of July was when we were notified. We had a meeting on the 1st, we met on the 3rd. That was the Friday. I think that was the night, the day the Queen was there. We then were taking immediate action over the course of that weekend to clear the Beatson to relocate the patients back. So this is less than 7 days since the results of the tests have become available. So this is written as an immediate briefing note. It's not written as any kind of retrospective of processes, etc. at that point in time. This is a briefing note that's saying, as of today, we are moving these patients back across. If I refer to points earlier on, I had no idea if this was only Ward 4B. What was it everywhere? What was the issue? So that's, looking at the date of that, it's the 6th of July. That is within days of us getting those results back. It was not meant to be, here's a hypothesis or here's a work through of everything that was done. It was an immediate briefing note, and I think that was sent round my acute director colleagues as well, just so that they were aware of it. But also, given that I was raising the issue of our environment not being correct, also to highlight were there any concerns, or to alert that there may have been concerns coming together. So that's not what that document is about.
You did pen later documents, but these are way on in 2018 when you're actually looking more closely at bringing the thing back. So I'm not going to ask you to look at these. Again,
I would just state, unfortunately, I can't access any information of my own that I could have brought or submitted to the inquiry. I can only rely on the documents that have been sent to me.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate that. Well, Lord, I think in the circumstances, this is where I would intend to pause my questioning.
Mr. Jenkins, at this stage, what we do is give counsel the opportunity to discuss with his colleagues whether there are any other questions in the room. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. So if I could ask you to return to the witness room, and we will be back in touch as soon as we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Stand. Please.
Three or four questions, Lord.
We have some more questions.
Okay.
Mr. Connell.
Bouncing around a bit, I'm afraid, as is the nature of the beast. The process that you've been discussing is one where you had a reasonably senior role and issues were being encountered. Somebody in that kind of manager, general manager, director level, would you expect them to sort of do due diligence on any significant step, perhaps moving a cohort of patients, to take that as the obvious example? And then if there were issues, get on quite quickly to investigate it. Is that the kind of reaction you would expect from somebody around that level?
Yes, if I might, if you relate it to the BMT, transferring
Yes,
it
of
back to
course.
the basin.
Now, purely administrative point, given some of the evidence you've given us, I think you indicated, and again, I'd like corrected if I've not picked this up, that you think you probably emailed a number of people to explain what you and Parker and your manager colleague,
Myra Campbell.
Myra Campbell, thank you, had done and what you had laid out, and why you were perplexed, or words to that effect. Can you remember who you put that in writing to?
No, the point I was making is I would be happy if my inbox was reconstructed to go through that. This would be 12 years ago. I'd be happy if those are reconstructed to go through and try and find any evidence. It was, I think what I was trying to answer was the point that you had made, that it seems light on information from me, but I didn't submit anything. I've only used the documents that have been provided by the inquiry.
So I understand it. The inquiry has processes by which it can go looking if it knows where to look. So if you said, I remembered, I probably sent an email to Jonathan Best.
Oh, yes.
Well, we can do that. So
Yes,
can you give us any indication as to the
Yes.
likely persons that you sent such communications to?
I can give you a list. I mean,
Right.
I would like to go and write it down and consider it,
Well,
if that's helpful.
I think the easiest thing to do is to take you up on that offer. If you go away, think about it, write it down, and email the inquiry team here with the list of people that you think you may have emailed along the lines we've just discussed, then that would be very helpful if the board is happy with that.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then we can decide whether anything further can be done at our end. Thank you very much. By the time you left your post, sorry, I'll restart that question. The discussions that you participated in, the options appraisals and so on, revealed at least a level of concern about taking the option of going back to the new hospital. That wasn't the new hospital by then, it'd been open for a while. By the time you left, were you still concerned, or were you happy, or where were you sitting?
So by the time I left, I was more comfortable, is a reasonable way to put it. And I will indicate why. We ultimately had brought together Health Protection Scotland, Health Facilities Scotland, I think every specialist microbiologist that existed in the UK, with the clinical team, with the haematologists, and had taken the consolidation of all of that to put it into the remedial plan for the 4B at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. So I was comfortable that the patients were in an environment that had the infrastructure that was needed. The clinical team were happy with that. and that the expert advice had been consolidated in to give the best product that could be created.
So you had done the best you possibly could
At that point, I
at that
wasn't.
point.
Yes, at that point, I wasn't leaving thinking, oh my gosh, this is and unless something else had come up, which I think there was then a series of water incidents, but that's not to do with the BMT service.
And I may have asked something similar to this earlier, because this is really my last question. Ventilation, filtration, HEPA filtration,
Yeah.
air change rates, pressure differentials. Do all of these matter to the protection of patients in the BMT unit, in your view?
In my view, from my experience of what I have gone through with this, yes, they do.
Thank you. I have nothing further, my lord.
And I have no further questions. Ms. Jenkins, you're therefore free to go, but before you do, can I thank you for your evidence this afternoon, but also what's behind that evidence, the preparing the statement and doing the necessary reading in order to back that up. So, as I say, free to go, but many thanks indeed for your contribution to the inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Tomorrow, my lord, we return to Mr. McIntosh, who has another remote witness, I understand. Mr. Stewart.
Is that Mr. Stewart?
Yes, and then I am returning in the afternoon with Mr. Gallagher.
Mr. Gallagher. Very well. Well, can I wish everyone here a pleasant afternoon and evening, and all being well, we'll see each other tomorrow at 10.